Maria called me crying at 3 a.m. 6 months after her best friend's suicide. "Steve," she sobbed, "why did I get to live when Sarah didn't? Why am I here and she's gone? I feel guilty for every breath I take." Her story reveals the hidden torture of suicide survivors. The unbearable weight of wondering why you deserved life when someone you loved chose death. Maria's journey through survivor guilt shows why healing from suicide loss requires forgiving yourself for living. See, we think grief is about missing someone who died. But what I learned from Maria's story is that suicide grief is different. It's about questioning your own right to exist when someone you loved couldn't find a reason to keep existing. It's about carrying guilt for a choice you didn't make and couldn't control. Maria spent 8 months torturing herself with the most painful question a human being can ask. Why me? Not why me in terms of suffering, but why me in terms of survival. Her healing journey teaches every suicide survivor that your life isn't an insult to their death. Let me tell you about Maria Rodriguez from Denver. She's 48 years old, works as a school counselor, married to Carlos for 22 years, mother to 3 kids, Elena, 19, Diego, 16, and Sophia, 14. But Maria's story really starts with her friendship with Sarah Mitchell, a bond that lasted 25 years. Maria and Sarah met in graduate school, studying psychology together, sharing dreams of helping people through mental health challenges. They were inseparable. Maid of honor in each other's weddings, godmothers to each other's children, the kind of friends who talked every day and knew each other's deepest secrets. Sarah was my person, Maria tells me. She knew me better than my husband, better than my family. We'd been through everything together, career changes, parenting struggles, marriage problems, family deaths. I thought we'd grow old together. Maria describes Sarah as brilliant, compassionate, and deeply empathetic, qualities that made her an exceptional therapist, but also made her vulnerable to absorbing others' pain. Sarah specialized in trauma therapy, working with abuse survivors and veterans with PTSD. Sarah carried everyone's trauma, Maria explains. She was so good at helping others heal, but she couldn't heal herself. She joked that therapists make the worst patients, but I didn't realize how serious that was. Over the years, Maria watched Sarah struggle with depression, anxiety, and what Sarah called compassion fatigue, the emotional exhaustion that comes from constantly helping people process trauma. I knew Sarah was struggling, but she was a mental health professional. I figured she knew how to manage her own mental health. I trusted that she would ask for help if she needed it. Looking back, Maria can identify warning signs she missed or dismissed. Sarah had been more isolated lately, canceling plans, seeming overwhelmed by work, talking about feeling burnt out and empty. 3 months before she died, Sarah said something that haunts me, Maria recalls. "Sometimes I feel like I've given away so much of myself to help others that there's nothing left for me. I thought she just needed a vacation." Sarah had been seeing more clients than usual, taking on the most difficult cases, working late hours, and rarely taking time for self-care. She'd stopped attending their monthly friend gatherings, claiming she was too tired or too busy. Sarah was always the helper, Maria says. Even when she was struggling, she was more concerned about everyone else's problems than her own. She'd ask about my kids, my marriage, my work stress, but deflect whenever I asked how she was doing. The week before Sarah's death, she seemed different, calmer, more at peace, which Maria initially interpreted as Sarah finally finding balance. She called me that Tuesday and said, "Maria, I want you to know how much your friendship has meant to me. You've been the best friend anyone could ask for." I thought she was just being sentimental, but now I realize she was saying goodbye. Maria's biggest regret is their final conversation. Sarah called Thursday evening asking if they could talk, but Maria was dealing with Sophia's school problems and asked if they could catch up the next day. I said, "Can we talk tomorrow? Sophia's having a crisis and I need to handle this." Sarah said, "Of course, family first. I love you." Those were the last words we ever spoke. Friday morning, Sarah was found in her car in the garage, dead from carbon monoxide poisoning. Maria's survivor guilt began immediately and consumed everything. At Sarah's funeral, she couldn't stop thinking, why didn't I make time for that phone call? What if she needed me and I chose my daughter's drama over my friend's life? I kept thinking that if I had just talked to her that night, I could have heard something in her voice, sensed her desperation, convinced her to get help, Maria explains. I convinced myself that I failed her when she needed me most. The guilt expanded beyond that final conversation. Maria started questioning every interaction they'd had in the months before Sarah's death. Why didn't I insist she see a therapist? Why didn't I recognize that her calmness was actually resignation? Why didn't I take her struggles more seriously? Why didn't I do more? But the deepest torment was existential. Why did I get to live when Sarah didn't? What made my life more valuable than hers? How can I justify being here when someone as good as Sarah chose to leave? Maria stopped enjoying anything. She felt guilty for laughing, guilty for celebrating her children's achievements, guilty for having good days when Sarah would never have another day at all. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment of happiness felt like a betrayal, Maria says. How could I celebrate life when my best friend couldn't bear to live it? Maria's depression deepened when she realized she was beginning to understand Sarah's choice. The guilt was so overwhelming that death started to seem like relief from the constant self-torture. 6 months after Sarah's suicide, Maria found herself standing on the same bridge where Sarah had often gone to think, contemplating whether joining her friend would end the unbearable guilt. That night, Maria called me. When Maria called me, I heard something that broke my heart, the voice of someone whose love for a friend had become a weapon against herself. Maria, I told her, you're torturing yourself for being human. You're punishing yourself for not being God. You couldn't save Sarah because Sarah's pain was bigger than your love, and that's not your failure. I shared with her something I learned from my own experiences with loss. Survivor guilt is love with nowhere to go. You loved Sarah so much that you'd rather blame yourself than accept that sometimes love isn't enough to save someone from their own darkness. But I also understood her deepest question. You're asking why me because you can't make sense of losing someone good while you're still here. But life isn't distributed based on who deserves it most. Sarah's death doesn't mean she was less worthy. It means her pain was more than she could bear. I explained to Maria the difference between responsibility and response. You weren't responsible for saving Sarah's life, but you are responsible for honoring it. Sarah didn't die because you failed her. She died because her illness won. But you can choose to live in a way that honors her memory. Maria asked me how she could possibly feel worthy of life when someone as wonderful as Sarah couldn't find reasons to live. I told her, your worthiness isn't comparative. Sarah's death doesn't make your life less valuable, and your life doesn't make her death less tragic. You can honor her by choosing to live fully, not by destroying yourself with guilt. Over the next 6 months, Maria and I worked together on what I call survivor healing. Transforming guilt into purpose and pain into meaning. First, we addressed the false responsibility Maria had assumed. You weren't Sarah's savior. You were her friend. Friends love, support, and care for each other, but they can't control each other's ultimate choices about life and death. Maria began grief counseling specifically for suicide survivors, learning that the what-ifs that tortured her were normal, but not factual. Second, we reframed her survival from guilt to responsibility. You didn't survive because you deserved it more than Sarah. You survived because you have work left to do. Sarah's death can either destroy another life or inspire you to help save other lives. Maria started volunteering with suicide prevention organizations, using her professional counseling skills to help other survivors process their guilt. Third, we worked on living as tribute rather than betrayal. Every moment of joy you experience doesn't dishonor Sarah's memory. It honors the love she had for you. Sarah wanted you to be happy. Destroying your happiness doesn't bring her back. 12 months after Sarah's death, Maria achieved something she thought was impossible. She felt worthy of her own life again. I realized that Sarah didn't die because I failed her. She died because mental illness is a disease that sometimes wins despite our best efforts to fight it, Maria says. My guilt wasn't helping Sarah or honoring her memory. It was just creating more suffering. The breakthrough came when Maria was counseling a teenage girl whose brother had died by suicide. The girl was consumed with guilt, asking the same "why me" questions that had tortured Maria. As I helped her understand that her brother's death wasn't her fault, I heard my own words and realized I needed to give myself the same compassion I was giving her, Maria explains. Maria decided to honor Sarah's memory by living purposefully rather than dying guiltily. She established a scholarship fund for mental health graduate students, became a certified suicide prevention trainer, and started speaking at conferences about suicide survivor support. I can't bring Sarah back, Maria says, but I can use my experience to help other suicide survivors heal and maybe prevent other families from experiencing this loss. Within 2 years, Maria had completed specialized training in suicide survivor support, helped establish support groups for families affected by suicide, counseled over 100 suicide survivors through their guilt and grief, advocated for better mental health resources for therapists, written articles about suicide prevention and survivor support. Her marriage strengthened as Carlos learned to support her healing journey. Her children gained a deeper understanding of mental health and the importance of seeking help when struggling. What Maria taught me through her survivor guilt journey is that healing from suicide loss requires forgiving yourself for living when someone you loved chose death. Here's what every suicide survivor needs to know. First, you are not responsible for someone else's suicide, even if you missed warning signs, even if you weren't available when they reached out, even if you could have done more. Suicide is a result of illness, not lack of love. Second, survivor guilt is love with nowhere to go. The guilt you feel is proof of how much you cared, but torturing yourself doesn't honor their memory or ease their suffering. Third, why me is a question without answers that can drive you insane. Life and death aren't distributed based on worthiness. Your survival doesn't require justification. Fourth, living fully doesn't betray the memory of someone who died by suicide. It honors the love they had for you. They wanted you to be happy, not to suffer in their memory. Fifth, your pain is valid, but it doesn't have to be permanent. Healing from suicide loss is possible, and getting help is not a betrayal of your grief. Sixth, you can transform your survival into purpose. Many suicide survivors become advocates, counselors, and supporters for others facing similar losses. Seventh, professional help is essential for processing suicide loss. The grief is too complex and the guilt too overwhelming to handle alone. If you're a suicide survivor right now, remember what Maria learned. Your friend or family member's death was not your failure, and your life is not an insult to their memory. The pain you feel is proof of the love you shared. The guilt you carry is evidence of your caring heart. But neither the pain nor the guilt needs to destroy your life. Maria couldn't save Sarah, but she has saved dozens of other suicide survivors from drowning in guilt. She couldn't prevent one death, but she has prevented others through her advocacy and support work. Her survival became meaningful not because she justified it through guilt, but because she transformed it into purpose. That's not just healing from suicide loss. That's turning tragedy into tribute. Remember this, the person you lost would want you to live, to heal, to find peace, and to help others. Your healing doesn't diminish their importance. It honors their love. Maria learned what every suicide survivor needs to learn. You can grieve someone's death without destroying your own life. You can miss them without joining them. You can honor their memory by choosing to live fully, not by dying slowly from guilt. Y'all remember that. Your survival is not a betrayal. It's an opportunity to turn your pain into purpose and your love into legacy. The best way to honor someone who died by suicide is to live with intention, seek help when you need it, and support others who are struggling. That's not just surviving, that's thriving in their memory.